Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our 10th shiur of Chayei Moharan. This is very exciting. I hope you all had a great week. I realized this evening that not only is this going to be the 10th shiur, but it's also, when we're recording this, the evening of the 10th of Nisan. So there is no coincidence. That is definitely Hashgacha Pratis. So Baruch Hashem. What a time to be teaching and learning this shiur together with you all. Tonight, just like last week, we're actually going to be covering two paragraphs from the Sefer. This is going to be lessons 111, that's Kuf Yud Aleph, and Kuf Yud Beis. Continuing on from the topic, which we ended with last week, the Sefer continues on. And as you may recall from last week, Rebbe Nachman received 300 gold coins as a marriage gift. And he survived on that until that money ran out. And tonight we're going to touch on the age-old question we all experience in our own lifetime, and which Rabbeinu was grappling with here. And that question is, how will I earn a living? We've all had those moments in our life. Perhaps we're going through those moments at this current time and in whatever stage of life we're going through. But this is definitely the age-old question. How do I provide for my family? How do I support my family with parnasa? Where is my parnasa going to come from? And this is something that we're going to touch on just slightly tonight from what Rabbeinu himself was going through. So with that, let's jump in, beginning in Kuf Yud Aleph. And if you are in the BRI English version, if you're looking inside with us, following along, this is page 38 and 39, and we're going to be covering paragraphs 8 and 9 from the English, and page Kuf Lamed Hey. If you're with me in this Sefer, we're starting with Kuf Yud Aleph. So with that, let's begin. Writes Reb Nosson, V'haya ragil l'saper harbe me'inyan machshavoisav shahayu loy az b'mei ne'urav. Rebbe Nachman, he would tell us the concepts and ideas that he had when he was still in his youth. And he would tell us these ideas and regarding his own thoughts on parnasa. And the idea that he didn't want to be famous in any way whatsoever. And he didn't want any sort of fame, and he didn't want to accept any sort of money from people who would give it to him. And he had several thoughts regarding this. How could he best conceal himself in a way where he didn't gain fame and notoriety? And the other thing that he kept thinking about was, where was he going to earn his parnasa? If he was going to accept handouts from people, then how is he going to earn a living by himself? Or where was that going to come from? Obviously, it was going to come from Hashem. The Rebbe had deep emunah, but still, you have to do your shtadlus. So where's that going to come from? And this is something Rebbe Nachman was dealing with. And I want to touch on this idea. So there's something really deep in Rebbe Nachman's Torah in general, and that is the holiness of silence. We usually think of avodah, of davening, when we're learning, when we're doing mitzvahs, but sometimes Rebbe Nachman teaches that real avodah happens in the stillness. It happens in moments of silence, when you're not doing anything at all, just being with Hashem. I want to explore this idea a little bit further tonight. The Mishnah in Avos writes, Rabbi Kiva Omer, Schoik v'kales roish, margilin le'erva. Rabbi Kiva says, merriment and frivolity accustom one to promiscuity. Misoires sayag leTorah. Tradition is a fence to the Torah. Maisros siag la'oisher. That's giving tithes on your fruits and your produce. That's a fence for wealth. Nidarim siag leprishus, vows are a fence to abstinence. This is something Rebbe Nachman touches on himself. And siag lechachma shesika, a fence to wisdom is silence. This is the line I want to explore a little bit further. So on the surface, it sounds like a very nice piece of advice from Rabbi Akiva, a fence, wisdom to silence. Perhaps that just means being careful what we say. But Rabbi Nachman takes this a step further using Chassidus and Kabbalah and brings a whole new depth to this idea. In Kabbalah, the sphere of Keser, known as the crown, sits above all other levels, even that of Chachma. In Kabbalah, Keser represents something that's above comprehension, something that's above logic. And this is called Ratzon, pure will. When we have the desire to do something good, something in spirituality that's going to connect us to Hashem, this is the idea of Ratzon. And it's this place where we can connect to Hashem without any explanations or intellectual pathways. So when the Mishnah says, Siyag l'chachma, that a fence for wisdom is shesika, is silence, it doesn't just mean that we need to protect this feature, protect this quality. It means that this silence is the gateway to something even higher than chachma, even higher than wisdom itself. Silence is a way to tap into Keser, the place beyond words, beyond thinking, just pure being with Hashem in a state of devekus. In Sichas Haran 279, the Rebbe describes to his disciple Reb Nosson the practice of self-nullification known in Chassidus as bittul, which entails making oneself silent. Rebbe Nosson recalls how this conversation came about, and it's written here in Sichas Haran. Once Rebbe Nachman told me, when things are very bad, nullify yourself completely. It says in Yiddish, mevatel zich. I asked him, how can one nullify the self? He answered, close your mouth and close your eyes. This is bittul. This is nullification. From this, we can learn practical advice. When the evil one, when the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, overwhelms us and disturbs us with all sorts of evil thoughts and confusions, trying to throw us off from doing what we should be doing, and it is so powerful that it feels like we cannot seem to overcome the struggle or the urge, that is when we should nullify ourselves. And everyone can accomplish this, at least from time to time. Simply close your mouth and your eyes and clear away your thoughts as if you possess no intellect or reason whatsoever and nullify yourself completely before Hashem. This, I feel, is a very, very powerful lesson. And Rebbe Nachman is giving us real eitzah. He's giving us real, doable, practical advice. And this is why I love Rebbe Nachman so much. And this is a tool for when we're overwhelmed, when we're feeling like we're struggling, or we have a state of serious confusion or negative thoughts, anxiety, or sadness. And Rebbe Nachman is not just saying to fight it all with more thoughts. Rebbe Nachman is really just teaching us just to stop, to close our mouth, close our eyes, and let go. And it's not about erasing who we are. It's not about just letting go. It's about letting go of our ego and the need for control over everything. Sometimes we feel like we need to be fully in control, and we forget who's actually in control, and it's all Hashem. And we just need to let go and let Hashem help us to try and figure that out by just stopping, pausing, sitting down, closing our eyes, closing our mouths, breathing, and letting go of our thoughts. And when we're in those moments, we can say, the only thing we should be saying in those moments is, Ribono Shel Olam, I'm all yours. I don't know anything. I'm just here with you, and I give my full faith, my full trust in you, and I know you're going to help me. And this is what Rebbe Nachman is teaching, that you can come back to Hashem not with brilliance, but with silence, not with power, but with surrender. And in that moment of bittul, when you give up your ego, your controls, your explanations, that's where real closeness begins. And maybe, if I can say, this is the deepest tie between Rebbe Nachman's teaching of bittul and Pesach. Right before Yom Tif, we say the following declaration, Kol chamira v'chamia, and the paragraph ends, Lebatel oleheve efer kahafra da'ara. Let all chametz be nullified like the dust of the earth. And this is not just about bread. In a deeper sense, this is also about our ego. It's about the noise. It's about the part of ourselves that puff up. They rise and they take over. And this is how we can be mavatal. We can nullify our own spiritual chametz. And what's Rebbe Nachman's advice for when life gets overwhelming? We close our mouth, we close our eyes, we're silent, and we're mevatel ourselves. And this is the avodah of Pesach as well. The word Pesach can be read as Pesach, a mouth that speaks. That's part of what the Haggadah is about. We're telling a story. We're speaking words of emunah. We're praising Hashem with our mouths. We're singing songs. We're sharing divrei Torah. But the irony is that before we can arrive at true state of redemptive speech, we have to go through a stage of silence. And think about Mitzrayim. The word Mitzrayim there's a root of the word, which is meitzar, narrowness, constriction. And in Mitzrayim, our mouths were closed, we were suffering, we were slaves, and the Jews couldn't cry out. The oppression was so intense that even our voices were blocked. And so before we speak at the Seder, before we arrive at the stage of peh, which can sach, a mouth which can speak, we must first be silent. We must flatten our ego. We must let go of control. This is the whole idea of bedikas chametz and biur chametz, in which this is the stage where we can return to simple, humble faith. We can be the matzah. We can be flat, thin, and have no longer that stage of ego. So bittul isn't about nothingness. It's about making space for Hashem, for truth, for geula. And I think this is a beautiful segue to the last line of this paragraph, where it says, "V'lif amim hayuloi machshavos sheyechazer ala psachim." That there were times where Rebbe Nachman felt that he wanted to return to a state where he could go begging. He could be a beggar and go on the streets and ask. So although he said he didn't want to accept handouts, there was another stage where he said he wanted to go back to that and be a beggar. V'ish lo yodea mimenu. And like the Baal Shem Tov, who often would go around from town to town before he gained fame and notoriety, he too would go around begging from town to town, or at least appear like that of a beggar. And Rebbe Nachman said that he too wanted to arrive back at the stage, even later on in his life, where he could walk the streets and no one would know who he was whatsoever. So I feel this also is a stage of chametz. This is a place where Rebbe Nachman nullified that ego, nullified who he was, even after being the great Rebbe that he was, with the fame and the followers. So just as we nullify chametz in hidden moments, Rabbeinu here is teaching us that sometimes our deepest spiritual work, unseen by others, occurs quietly and privately, but is beyond precious in Hashem's eyes. So, segueing to the next paragraph of Kuf Yud Beis, this previous paragraph was all about anonymity, but now we're about to learn how that changed. We touched on this briefly in previous weeks, and it began with Rebbe Nachman's wedding, where he gained his first follower, and then at the second wedding of Rebbe Nachman's father-in-law, and there we learned how he taught Torah publicly for the first time, and people began to spread word about who this great Talmud Chacham was. So here we're going to learn a little bit more about how Rabbi Nachman began to gain even more followers. So these two paragraphs are very closely connected, because it talks about anonymity and it talks about the next stage, about gaining a following. So the words of this paragraph begin with achar kach, and this is not the last time we're going to see a paragraph in this sefer of Chayei Moharan which opens up that way. We've already seen it before. I just find it very interesting wording, because as we learned last week, where Reb Nosson says that some of the details in the sefer are not going to be in order, using the words achar kach is sort of like, okay, so where is this part of the sefer touching on? It's touching on exactly what happened right before, or is it touching on events, maybe perhaps a couple paragraphs beforehand? So to track it chronologically, to find out where this exactly happened, can be a little bit tricky. But from my learning and preparing for this shiur, I believe that Achar Kach is following the hidden years of private avodah, personal spiritual struggle, and this life of obscurity and struggling to make a living. If we recap from the past 2 weeks, or I think it was 2 weeks ago, Rebbe Nachman was forced to leave his father-in-law's home in Osatin and resettled in Medvedevka. And this is not the first time that I've said we're going to see these words, we're going to see them again. But as we mentioned in last week's events, they were recorded by Reb Nosson, and because they weren't in order, I believe this is where it's jumping to, now back to Medvedevka, and we're going to see some things of what happened while he was in that town. So, here we go. Achar kach nichnas leMedvedevka. After these events of the anonymity and not wanting notoriety and struggling for parnasa, Rebbe Nachman made it to Medvedevka. V'sham niskabtzu kama anshe kfarim v'asu loi ma'amad kavua liten loi echad rendel. In the city of Medvedevka, Rebbe Nachman began to gain a following. People started to gather around him and learn from him and want to be close to him. And these people that were close to Rebbe Nachman, they set up a fund in order to supply Rebbe Nachman with parnasa, with some sort of livelihood. And this fund that they set up was the equivalent of 1 rendel. I tried to look up what 1 rendel is. Wasn't really clear the value of this coin, but whatever that currency was, clearly it was enough to be able to make it on a regular basis. So this was the parnasa that he was getting from this fund from his talmidim. B'chol shavua, and he got this. This was a once a week thing that the Rebbe Nachman was given. V'yashav sham b'Medvedevka, b'hashgate, b'shalva ksas, and this time in Medvedevka was one of quiet. It was one of peace and quiet reflection. Was one where Rebbe Nachman could focus. B'sham yischilu kama anashim le'izkar ve'elav v'nilvu elav anashim rabim miyom el yoim. And here, Rebbe Nachman began to attract followers, and it grew on from day to day. More people were becoming close to the Rebbe. V'hischilu linsoya alav mehasvivois, and these people began to gather around Rebbe Nachman from the surrounding cities and towns. Ad shehischilu lihinsoya elav mekomis rechoikim be'erich esrim parsais, and people began to even travel from further places, around 20 parsas in, I would say, surrounding the city of Medvedevka. For context, 20 parsas is the equivalent of 200 kilometers, which is about 125 miles. Ki anshe dashev niskarvo elav be'es yeshivasei sham. And the people of Dashev also began to come close to Rebbe Nachman, and the city of Dashev is approximately 80 miles from the city of Medvedevka, which is approximately 129 kilometers. Some of these people that came from Dashev, we're going to learn a little bit more about them in this sefer. Some of them being Reb Yudel, there was Reb Shmuel Isaac, there was a chassid named Reb Dov, and another great chassid, which we'll definitely be learning about in Chayei Moharan, and he had many very holy descendants. His name was Reb Aaron, and he was the Rav of Breslov. So even he became a chassid at the time, and some of these stories about who these chassidim are recorded in a sefer called Koich Ve'or, and also in Anshe Moharan. So if you want to look those up, Koich Ve'or, Anshe Moharan, and for Anshe Moharan, it's Ois Yud Tes, if you'd like to look that up. That's number 19. Touches more on those chassidim and when they first joined. Continuing the sefer, B'chol mi shezacha le'izkar v'elav, and all those who wanted to come close to Rebbe Nachman, nismali yirah shamayim, they were filled with the fear of heaven. V'haya meishiv rabim ma'avoin, and they returned from any ways of sin. They had a fear of Hashem, fear of sin. They were doing teshuvah. Ve'kervam lahashem yisparach be'eskarvas gadol v'chulei v'chulei. And Rebbe Nachman, through his personality and through his teachings and just his warmth, were bringing these Yidden close to Hashem in a beautiful, very, very close way. Great kirvos elikim. V'gam b'Medvedevka hayalik tzas machlekes. Also in Medvedevka, unfortunately, there was some machlekes, there was some opposition that Rebbe Nachman began to face as he gained more notoriety. There were people who didn't necessarily agree with all of Rebbe Nachman's ways. And we're going to touch on that shortly in later weeks. Aval kol sainav naflu lefanav, but all of, and I'm just going to say enemies that Rebbe Nachman had, any opposition, they fell before him. V'hayu sham eza masyos im harabanim desham, and Reb Nosson writes here that there were some incidents with some of the rabbis that were there. Ach eini yodea oisam kol habruim. But Rebbe Nachman says, as Rebbe Nosson writes, that the details aren't exactly clear, therefore he doesn't bring those up here. So, even with all that pushback and that opposition, there's a clear idea in Breslov and in spiritual growth and Chassidus that spiritual success does not always equal smooth sailing. And even as Rebbe Nachman began to teach and uplift others, he faced this resistance. And this is not the only instance where Rebbe Nachman faces resistance. He faced resistance his whole upbringing, his whole young life. But resistance is the way we grow. And we will all learn about some of these oppressors and opposing figures later on. So we've been talking about Rebbe Nachman disguising himself as a beggar, finding his place, and the bitterness that often comes at the beginning of serving Hashem sincerely, even in his own hesitation when gaining notoriety. And the bitterness that Rebbe Nachman faces, which we've only just begun to explore in the first few weeks that we've been doing this year, and we're going to continue to uncover, was never a sign of failure, chas v'shalom. It was a sign that Rebbe Nachman was getting even closer to Hashem, and that he was fulfilling his tachlis, fulfilling his purpose in this world. And in honor of Pesach, I want to conclude by sharing one of Rebbe Nachman's most famous stories. I feel it's also relevant to what we've been learning tonight, and therefore I wanted to bring it up. And for anyone who's heard it or hasn't heard it, this story is known as the bitter herb. So here's the story goes. All right, sit back, relax. This is a favorite of mine. So here goes. Once, two beggars, a Jew and a German Gentile, traveled together close to Pesach. Arriving in a small town and looking for a seder and a meal, the Jew had a plan. He told the German to pretend he was a Jew, which he could do since their language is very similar, Yiddish and German, and the Jew would have pity on him. Since Pesach was approaching, the Jew taught him how to behave at a seder. He outlined the stages of the seder, how Kiddush is made, and that you wash your hands twice, and that you read the Haggadah and we tell over the story, and that there's matzah and Shulchan Aruch, a massive feast. However, this Yid, this Jewish beggar, he forgot to tell the German Gentile about Morar. He forgot to tell him about the bitter herb. On Pesach night, they went to shul, and they were invited to different homes. The Yid went to one home, the German Gentile went to another, and the German was very hungry, so he really was looking forward to this massive feast that the Yid had piped up and praised that this was going to be a meal to remember. However, first they gave the German a piece of celery, and he dipped it in salt water, and then other things were served at the table, and they did Kiddush, and they told over the story of Pesach. And he was sitting there just longing. He really wanted this meal. He was starving. And as they were getting towards the end of Magid, they had made the bracha on the kos, and then he had some matzah, and just as we thought, okay, here we go, we're about to eat, they gave the German a piece of horseradish. Not knowing what this was, he took a bite into it, and his face was on fire. His mouth was flamed, and it was so bitter. And he thought, oh, great, this is the entire meal. What is this? and he was so angry and beyond furious with what he had just experienced, the cuisine from these people, and he bolted from the table, bitter and hungry and frustrated, saying to himself, "Cursed Jews, after all that ceremony, this is what you serve me." So he went to the synagogue, and this is where he agreed with his friend that this is where they were going to meet up after the Seder. And he found a bench, and he fell asleep. A few hours later, the Jew arrives, he's happy, and he's dancing, and his stomach is full from the entire Seder, and he is joyous from all the songs and the beautiful, beautiful Seder that he had just witnessed. He comes back, and he finds the German asleep on the bench, and he sees the German, he wakes up, and he's really, really angry. So he asks the German, "Tell me, what happened? Why are you so angry?" And the German told him exactly what had happened, that he sat through this entire Seder and the whole process, and just as they were about to start the meal, the only thing that he gets served is this bitter herb, and he was so frustrated that he bolted and left. And the Jew looks at him and says, "You stupid man. If you had waited just a little bit longer, you would have had the most lavish meal you've had in your entire life. Just had you waited." And I think this is the whole point. Bitterness is sometimes just the beginning. My father has a phrase that he shares with us. It's all good in the end, and if it's not good, it's not the end. We think Mar is the whole thing. We feel the sting, we feel the discomfort, the challenge, and we panic, and then we're like, that's it. We bolt, we run, we've had enough. But if we just wait that little bit longer, if we stay with it, if we stick with it, if we realize that we've put in all this work and we keep putting in the work and we put in the effort, then that bitterness is the very thing that purifies us. It creates the space for the greatest joy, the joy of closeness with Hashem, Kirvas Elikim. We can reach that state of devekos and arrive at that goal that we have been putting in all the effort to reach. So if we just hold steady, if we just wait a little bit longer, we discover. And then this bitterness, we realize, was hiding this beauty and this glorious feast. So with that, thank you everybody for joining us, whether you're watching live or if you're watching this recording on YouTube. Just a quick reminder that we'll be taking a brief pause for Pesach, but I will see you again in 2 weeks. So wishing you all a Chag Kasher V'Sameach, wishing you a happy Pesach, and take care. We'll see you next time.